I lost my child after my husband left me for my sister and got her pregnant, but on their wedding day, my other sister called me and said, "You do not want to miss this." It was exactly 8:14 a.m. on June 14th when my phone vibrated against the hardwood of my dining table, a harsh, mechanical buzzing that disrupted the absolute silence I had curated in my apartment since the funeral. I was sitting there, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago, dressed in the same oversized gray cardigan I had worn for 3 weeks straight. The date was significant not because it was a Saturday, but because 200 miles away, at the prestigious Oak Haven Vineyard Estate, my ex-husband Mark and my younger sister Jessica were preparing to exchange vows in a ceremony that cost, according to the invoices I had seen, exactly $84,500. I wasn't invited. In fact, there was a private security team, Titan Protection Services, hired specifically to ensure I didn't get within 500 yards of the perimeter. I had no intention of going. My plan for the day was to sit in the dark, reread the autopsy report for my son, Leo, and perhaps drink the bottle of expensive scotch Mark had left behind when he moved out to be with Jessica. But then the phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed Sarah, my youngest sister, the only member of my family who hadn't treated my tragedy as an inconvenience to their happiness. I picked it up. "Hello," I said, my voice cracking from disuse. The background noise on the other end was chaotic, the sound of hair dryers, manic laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. "Elena," Sarah whispered, her voice sounding like she was huddled in a closet. "You need to get in the car, now." I felt a dull throb of annoyance. "Sarah, we talked about this. I'm not coming. I'm not going to watch them celebrate. I'm not going to watch her pregnant." The word tasted like ash. Jessica was 7 months pregnant with Mark's child. My child, Leo, had been dead for 8 months. "No, you don't understand," Sarah hissed, the urgency in her voice cutting through my fog. "You aren't coming to watch them celebrate. You're coming because I found it. I found the folder, Elena, the one you said existed, the one Mark swore he burned. It's here. It's in his travel bag. And, Elena," I looked at the paternity test, the real one, not the PDF he emailed everyone. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. "What does it say?" I asked, the air in the room suddenly feeling very thin. "It says you do not want to miss this," Sarah replied. "The ceremony starts at 2 p.m. If you leave now, you'll make it just as they ask. If anyone has any objections, bring the hard drive. Bring everything." The line went dead. I sat there for exactly 10 seconds, the silence returning, but the quality of it had changed. It was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence of a predator spotting movement in the grass. I stood up. I didn't feel the fatigue that had plagued me for months. I walked to my bedroom, shed the gray cardigan, and opened the closet. I pulled out the black dress I had bought for my 5th anniversary dinner, the one Mark never showed up to. It was severe, elegant, and looked like something a widow would wear to bury a man, which, in a metaphorical sense, was exactly what I intended to do. As I zipped it up, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked thin, my cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, my eyes dark and hollow. I didn't look like the victim anymore. I looked like the consequences. I went to the safe in my office, spun the dial left to 14, right to 22, left to 05, the date Leo was born, and died, and retrieved the external hard drive. This drive contained the digital forensic reconstruction of Mark's life, a project I had embarked upon not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to understand how a man I loved for 7 years could destroy me so thoroughly. To understand the why, I had to go back to the when. It started 3 years ago. Mark was an architect, a man obsessed with facades and structures, charming, successful, the kind of man who knew the waiter's name and tipped 25%. I was a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm, a woman who found comfort in numbers, because numbers, unlike people, never lied. We were happy, or so I thought. The only shadow was our struggle to conceive. We spent $62,000 on 3 rounds of IVF. The hormones ravaged my body, the hope ravaged my mind, but Mark held my hand through every negative test. Then, finally, it happened. I was pregnant. A boy. We named him Leo before he was even the size of a lemon. My sister Jessica, the family's golden child, a 26-year-old lifestyle influencer who had never held a job that didn't involve a ring light, was ecstatic. She came over every day to help with the nursery. I was grateful. I was naive. I was working 60-hour weeks to save for my maternity leave, while Jessica and Mark spent hours painting the nursery walls a soft, dove gray. I ignored the signs, the lingering glances, the text messages at 11 p.m. that Mark claimed were from clients, the way Jessica stopped dating the personal trainer she had been obsessed with. I ignored it all because I wanted the family fantasy to be true. The collapse happened on October 14th. I was 24 weeks pregnant. I came home early from the office because I was feeling a strange, rhythmic cramping in my lower back. I walked into the house. It was quiet. I went upstairs to the nursery, thinking I would lie down on the daybed. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The air left my lungs as if I had been punched. Mark and Jessica were there, in the room meant for my son, on the rug I had picked out. They were entangled, frantic, oblivious. The shock was so physical, so violent, that my body reacted before my mind did. My blood pressure spiked. I felt a sharp, tearing pain in my abdomen that brought me to my knees. That was the placental abruption. The stress of the trauma had triggered a catastrophic physical rejection. They scrambled up, horrified, pulling on clothes, stammering excuses that meant nothing. Mark Mark tried to touch me. I screamed then, a sound I didn't recognize, and collapsed. The next 12 hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, beeping monitors, and the terrified faces of nurses. They performed an emergency C-section. Leo was born alive. He weighed 1 pound, 4 ounces. He lived for 42 minutes. I held him as he took his last breath, a tiny, bird-like gasp that haunts my nightmares every single night. Mark wasn't there. He was in the waiting room, arguing with Jessica. I could hear them through the thin walls. He wasn't mourning his son. He was managing his crisis. He was worried about how this would look. When the doctor pronounced Leo dead at 4:12 a.m., a part of me died with him. The part that believed in goodness. The part that believed in family. 2 days later, while I was still in the hospital bed, stitches pulling at my empty stomach, Mark came in with a lawyer. He served me divorce papers. He said the marriage was irretrievably broken and that the trauma of the loss was too much for us to bear together. He looked sad. He looked tragic. It was a performance. He moved out that afternoon. He moved in with Jessica. The betrayal was absolute, but the family's reaction was the twist of the knife I didn't expect. My mother, a woman who prioritized appearances above all else, urged me to be quiet about the affair. Jessica made a mistake, she told me, sitting on the edge of my bed while I clutched Leo's blanket. But they are in love, Elena, and you can't bring the baby back. Don't destroy your sister's life just because yours is ruined. I was too weak to fight them. I retreated. I signed the papers. I let Mark keep the house because I couldn't bear to walk past that nursery again. I moved into a small apartment downtown. I went back to work 2 weeks later, burying myself in spreadsheets and audits because the logic of mathematics was the only thing that made sense. And then, 2 months after the funeral, a funeral Jessica attended wearing sunglasses and a trench coat to hide her growing bump, they announced it. Jessica was pregnant. A miracle, my mother called it on Facebook. A rainbow baby. They claimed she was 3 months along. The math was sickeningly clear. She had gotten pregnant while I was still carrying Leo, while they were defiling his nursery. They were getting married in June. A shotgun wedding, but styled as the event of the season. My parents were paying for it. My friends, people I had known for a decade, slowly stopped calling me, uncomfortable with my grief, drawn to the shiny, happy narrative of Mark and Jessica's redemption arc. I became the ghost at the feast, the bitter ex-wife who couldn't move on. But they forgot one thing. I was a forensic accountant, and grief gives you a lot of sleepless nights to dig. I spent 6 months investigating Mark. I didn't look at his texts. I looked at his money. I looked at the digital footprint of his architecture firm, Apex Design. I looked at the trust fund Jessica claimed to have. I looked at everything. And what I found was not just infidelity. It was a labyrinth of fraud so extensive, it was almost beautiful in its architecture. Mark wasn't just a cheater. He was a thief. He had been funneling money from his clients' escrow accounts to pay for his lifestyle and for Jessica's. The investments he claimed to make for my parents, gone. Ponzi schemed into offshore accounts that were now empty. The mortgage on the house he fought me for, he hadn't paid it in 6 months. He was drowning, and he was using Jessica's pregnancy and the wedding as a way to secure a new line of credit from my father, who was poised to sign over a $500,000 wedding gift to help them start their new life. I had compiled all of this into a 400-page dossier. I had the bank statements. I had the wire transfers. I had the forged signatures. But I had sat on it. Why? Because I was depressed. Because I felt defeated. Because I didn't think anyone would listen to the crazy ex-wife until Sarah called. Sarah, who was 22 and the only one with a moral compass, had agreed to be a bridesmaid only to act as a spy. She knew something was wrong, and now she had the final piece of the puzzle, the paternity test. I grabbed my keys and the hard drive. I walked out of my apartment at 8:42 a.m. The drive to Oakhaven took 3 hours. I drove my beat-up Honda Accord, a stark contrast to the fleet of rented Bentleys that would be lining the driveway of the estate. I didn't listen to music. I rehearsed what I would say. I visualized the layout of the venue. I knew from Sarah that the ceremony was in the grand atrium, a glass-walled structure overlooking the vineyards. I knew that at 2 p.m., Mark would be standing at the altar, looking handsome and solemn, playing the role of the devoted patriarch to be. Jessica would be walking down the aisle, her baby bump displayed proudly in a custom Vera Wang gown. My parents would be in the front row, weeping tears of joy, oblivious to the fact that their son-in-law had stolen their retirement. I arrived at the perimeter gate at 11:55 a.m. The security guard, a burly man in a blazer, stepped out. "Name?" he asked, holding a clipboard. "Elena Vance," I said. He paused, scanning the list. "Ma'am, you are explicitly listed on the do not admit list. I'm going to have to ask you to turn around." I looked at him. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up a manila envelope. Inside was a single document, a copy of a lien I had discovered Mark had taken out against the venue itself, using a forged deed. "I understand," I said calmly. "However, I'm not here as a guest. I'm here as a creditor, and if you don't let me in, the sheriff's department, who I called 10 minutes ago, regarding a felony felony fraud in progress. Will be here shortly. You can explain to your boss why the police shut down the wedding, or you can let me drive up and handle this quietly." He hesitated. He looked at the envelope. He looked at my face. He saw the steely and determined look that had replaced my grief. "Park in the overflow lot," he grunted, opening the gate. "And don't cause a scene until the cops get here." "I plan to be the scene," I murmured as I drove past him. I parked the car. I checked my phone. 12:15 p.m. Sarah texted, "I'm in the bridal suite. Mark is in the library with Dad. They're signing the gift transfer papers in 20 minutes. Hurry." I walked up the gravel path toward the main house. The estate was teeming with florists and caterers. I slipped in through the catering entrance, blending in with the chaos. I knew the layout of Oakhaven. Mark had designed the renovation 5 years ago. I knew there was a service corridor that led directly to the library. I walked softly, the hard drive clutching in my hand like a grenade. I could hear voices as I approached the library door. My father's booming laugh, Mark's smooth, deferential tone. "Arthur, I can't thank you enough," Mark was saying. "This money, it's going to secure the future for Jessica and the baby, for little William." William. They were naming him William, my father's middle name, a calculated move to ensure the check cleared. "It's my pleasure, son," my father said. "I just want you kids to be happy. After everything, well, it's good to see joy in this family again." I stood outside the door. My hand hovered over the handle. This was phase 3, the discovery. Build coming to its end. I had the financial proof. Sarah had the paternity proof. Together, we were about to dismantle their reality. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I wasn't doing this for me anymore. I was doing it for Leo, for the life they treated as disposable, for the nursery they defiled. I pushed the door open. The heavy oak door swung inward with a creak. My father was sitting at the desk, a pen poised over a checkbook. Mark was standing pouring brandy. They both looked up. Mark's face went pale, the glass trembling in his hand. "Elena?" my father said, confusion clouding his face. "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here." "I know, Dad," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the hysteria they expected. "I'm not here to stop the wedding. I'm here to stop the transaction." I walked into the room and placed the hard drive on the desk, right next to the checkbook. Mark took a step forward. "Get out," he hissed, his eyes darting to the door. "Security. Security, let me in, Mark," I said, locking eyes with him, "because I told them about the forged deed you used to secure the loan for the catering." "What are you talking about?" my father asked, looking between us. "What forged deed?" "The one he signed your name to, Dad," I said. "Just like he signed your name to the withdrawal slips for your retirement account 3 months ago." My father stood up, his face reddening. "Elena, stop it. You're unwell. This is jealousy." "Is it?" I asked. "Open the drive, Dad. Or better yet, ask Mark why he has a one-way ticket to Costa Rica booked for tomorrow morning in his travel bag. A ticket for one, not for Jessica, not for the baby." Mark lunged for the drive, but the door behind me opened again. It was Sarah. She was wearing her pale pink bridesmaid dress, holding a tablet. Her face was tear-streaked but furious. "He's not going to Costa Rica for the baby, Dad," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Because there is no baby." The room went silent, the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. "What?" my father whispered. Mark froze, his hand halfway to the desk. "Tell them, Mark," Sarah said, stepping next to me, forming a united front. "Tell them what I found in your medical file. Or should I show them the pictures of the prosthetic belly Jessica ordered from Amazon?" "She's lying," Mark screamed, desperate now. "They're both crazy. Jessica is pregnant. You've seen the ultrasounds. We saw the PDFs you photoshopped." I corrected him. "Just like you photoshopped the bank statements." I looked at Sarah. "Show him." Sarah turned the tablet around. It wasn't a medical report. It was an email thread between Mark and Jessica dated 2 months ago. Asterisk subject, the timeline. Asterisk asterisk body. "We can't keep faking the bump forever. Once the check clears from your dad, we stage a miscarriage. We blame it on Elena causing stress. We take the money and we leave." Asterisk. My father read the screen. He read it twice. He looked at Mark. The look of benevolent patriarch vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. "You were going to fake a miscarriage?" my father whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "You were going to use my grandson's death, my daughter's trauma, as a script for your con?" "No, Arthur, listen," Mark stammered, backing away. "It's out of context. The wedding starts in 40 minutes, I said, checking my watch. "The guests are seated. The priest is ready. I think it's time we go to the atrium, Dad. I think everyone needs to see this." "No," Mark said, reaching into his jacket. "Nobody's going anywhere." He pulled out a gun. It was a small, black pistol. I recognized it. It was the one he kept in the nightstand for protection. He pointed it at me. "You just couldn't let it go, could you, Elena?" He spat. "You just had to dig." My father gasped. Sarah screamed, but I didn't flinch. I looked at the gun, then I looked at Mark. I realized in that moment that he was smaller than I ever thought possible. "Shoot me, Mark," I said softly. "It's the only way you're leaving this room with that check. But know this, I already emailed the dossier to the FBI, the IRS, and your partners at the firm. It went out at 12 p.m. automatically. You're already dead. You just haven't fallen over yet." The color drained from his face. The gun wavered. And in that moment of hesitation, the library door burst open. Not the police, not security. It was Jessica. She was in her wedding dress, holding her stomach, looking frantic. "Mark! Why is the security guard asking about Aline? Why is—" She stopped. She saw the gun. She saw me. She saw Sarah holding the tablet. She saw our father's face. "Jessica," I said, my voice cold and commanding, "take off the pillow. The show is over." Jessica looked at me, me, her eyes wide and rimmed with waterproof mascara that was beginning to fail against the sheer force of her panic, her hands clutching the white tulle of her Vera Wang gown as if it were armor rather than a costume. The silence in the library was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the distant, ironic strains of a string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon in D from the atrium, where 200 guests were waiting for a bride who was currently being held at gunpoint by the groom. Mark's hand was shaking so violently that the pistol barrel was vibrating, a physical manifestation of his loss of control, and I watched him with a detachment that frightened me more than the weapon did. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the rapid mental arithmetic of a narcissist, realizing the ledger no longer balanced. He looked at Jessica, then at the ticket in the open bag, then at my father, and finally, the gun lowered just an inch. "It's not what you think," Jessica whispered, her voice a reedy, desperate thing. "The ticket, it was a surprise, for a baby moon. Mark, tell them." She looked at him, begging for the lie to continue, begging for the reality she had constructed to hold its shape for just one more hour, just until the vows were said and the check was signed. Mark didn't look at her. He looked at me. "You ruined everything," he said, his voice devoid of the charm that had conned my parents out of their life savings. "We were going to leave. We were going to disappear. You would have had your house back. You would have been the tragic victim. Why couldn't you just be the victim, Elena? You were so good at it." "Because victims don't get refunds," I said, stepping forward, ignoring the gun. "And I want a refund, Mark, for every single minute I spent grieving a child you used as a prop." I turned to Jessica. "He's not taking you on a baby moon, Jess. Look at the date on the ticket. It's for tomorrow at 6 a.m. One passenger, economy class. He cashed out the offshore accounts yesterday. He was going to leave you at the altar, or maybe right after the reception, once Dad's check cleared. You were the getaway car, not the destination." Jessica's face crumbled. The denial that had shielded her for months finally cracked under the weight of the evidence. She turned to Mark, her hands dropping from her stomach. "Is that true?" she screamed, the sound shrill and piercing. "Mark, tell me she's lying. What about William? What about our family?" Mark laughed then, a cruel, jagged sound. "There is no William, you stupid cow. You know that. We made him up, just like we made up the ultrasound, just like we made up us." The brutality of the admission sucked the air out of the room. My father slumped into his chair, his face gray, looking suddenly 20 years older. He had lost a grandson, and now he was losing a daughter to a criminal conspiracy. But before Jessica could scream again, the sound of sirens cut through the estate grounds, not the distant wail of city traffic, but the immediate, whooping yelps of police cruisers approaching the gravel driveway. Mark froze. The reality of the FBI and the forensic accounting dossier I had sent finally landed. He looked at the window, then at the gun, and for a split second, I thought he might use it on himself. Instead, he did exactly what I expected a coward to do. He dropped it. It hit the Persian rug with a dull thud. He sank into the leather armchair, burying his face in his hands. "I can fix this," he mumbled into his palms. "I can cut a deal. I have names." Jessica stood there, alone in the center of the room, and I saw her hand move instinctively to her stomach, a reflex of the role she had played for so long. "Take it off," I said again, my voice low. "The police are going to search you, Jessica. Do you want them to find it, or do you want to show Dad who you really are right now?" She looked at our father, tears streaming down her face, and then, with shaking hands, she reached under the layers of silk and lace. She unhooked the straps. She pulled out the moon bump, a high-end silicone prosthetic that cost $400 and weighed 3 pounds to simulate the heft of a 7-month pregnancy. She let it drop to the floor next to the gun. It lay there, a flesh-colored mound of rubber, the grotesque physical evidence of their moral bankruptcy. My father stared at it. He didn't speak. He just closed his eyes and turned his head away. The library doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't a family member. It was the sheriff, accompanied by 2 federal agents wearing windbreakers that said IRS CI. They swarmed the room with practiced efficiency. "Mark Davison," one of the agents barked, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft." They hauled Mark up from the chair. He didn't fight. He just looked at me as they cuffed him. "You're a bitch, Elena," he spat. "A cold-hearted bitch." "I'm a forensic accountant, Mark," I corrected him. "Details matter." They moved to Jessica. "Jessica Vance?" the sheriff asked. "We have a warrant for your arrest as a co-conspirator in the defrauding of Arthur Vance and the misuse of charitable funds." Jessica shrieked as the cuffs clicked onto her wrists, her wedding dress bunching up around the metal. "No, I'm pregnant. You can't arrest a pregnant woman," she screamed, reverting to the lie in a moment of pure dissociation. "The prosthetic is on the floor, Sheriff," I said, pointing to the silicone mound. "Evidence item number 1. The sheriff looked at it, then at Jessica, shaking his head with disgust. "Let's go." As they dragged them out of the library, the commotion finally spilled over into the rest of the house. The guests in the atrium had heard the sirens. They had heard the screaming. I could see them pressing their faces against the glass walls of the corridor, a sea of confused faces in pastel dresses and linen suits. My father was still sitting in the chair, staring at the empty checkbook. I walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Dad," I said softly, "you need to stay here. Sarah will stay with you." He nodded, unable to speak. I looked at Sarah. "Watch him. Don't let the press in here." "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, wiping her eyes. "I have to go to the atrium," I said, smoothing the front of my black dress. "Someone has to tell the guests that there won't be a wedding, and I want to make sure the narrative is correct." I walked out of the library and into the main hallway. hallway. The police were marching Mark and Jessica toward the front entrance, but I turned left, toward the grand atrium. I walked past the terrified catering staff, past the confused string quartet who had stopped playing mid-measure. I pushed open the double-glass doors and stepped into the humid, floral-scented air of the venue. 200 people turned to look at me. A hush fell over the room. They recognized me. Elena, the bitter ex-wife, the woman who wasn't invited, wearing black to a wedding. I saw the judgment in their eyes, the whispers starting behind hands. I walked straight down the aisle, the white runner that was meant for Jessica. My heels clicked on the stone floor, a sharp, rhythmic sound that echoed in the vaulted ceiling. I reached the altar, where a bewildered priest was standing, clutching his book. I stepped up to the microphone stand that had been set up for the vows. I tapped it once. The sound boomed through the speakers. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice steady, amplified, reaching every corner of the room. "I am Elena Vance. Most of you know me as the maid of honor's sister. Some of you know me as the groom's ex-wife. But today, I am speaking to you as the auditor of this estate." A ripple of confused murmurs went through the crowd. I saw Mark's mother in the front row, clutching her pearls. "There will be no wedding today," I continued. 10 minutes ago, Mark Davison and Jessica Vance were taken into federal custody. Gasps. Someone dropped a glass. They have been arrested for orchestrating a Ponzi scheme that defrauded over $3 million from investors, including many of you in this room. I scanned the faces, seeing the realization hit Mark's business partners. Furthermore, they have been charged with attempting to defraud my father, Arthur Vance, of $500,000 under the pretense of starting a family. I paused, letting the next words gather weight. "There is no baby. Jessica was wearing a prosthetic. The pregnancy was a fabrication designed to accelerate the transfer of funds before Mark's insolvency was discovered. The timeline they presented to you that the child was a miracle conceived after my divorce was a lie. They were having an affair while I was pregnant with my son, Leo, and they used the tragedy of my son's death as a smokescreen to hide their theft." The room erupted. It wasn't just shock, it was a visceral, collective recoil. I saw Mark's mother faint. I saw friends of Jessica covering their mouths, scrolling through their phones where they had posted photos of the baby shower. I saw the witnesses shift from the crowd to the jury. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, the black dress standing out like a scar against the white floral arrangements. "Please vacate the premises," I said. "The venue has been seized as an asset in the federal investigation. The catering has been canceled because the check bounced. Thank you." I stepped down from the altar. I walked back down the aisle, the crowd parting for me as if I were Moses. No one said a word to me. They were too busy pulling out their phones, frantically checking their bank accounts, or staring at me with a mixture of terror and awe. I had walked in as the pariah. I was walking out as the prophet. I made it to the parking lot just as the police cruisers were pulling away. I saw Jessica in the back of one, her face pressed against the window, sobbing. She looked at me. I didn't look away. I didn't wave. I just watched her disappear down the long, tree-lined drive. The climax was over. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I walked to my car, the beat-up Honda Accord that contained my real life, not the glossy fiction they had tried to sell. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I took a deep breath. It was done. But the aftermath was just beginning. The legal fallout would be immense. The trial would be a circus, and I would have to testify. I would have to relive the betrayal on the stand. I started the car. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Dad is okay. He's with the lawyers. He wants to see you tomorrow. He says he's sorry." I didn't reply. Apologies were just words. I dealt in evidence, and today the evidence had spoken. I drove out of the estate, passing the Titan Protection Services guard, who was now busy directing traffic for the fleeing guests. He tipped his hat to me. I drove for an hour without a destination, just needing the motion. I ended up at the cemetery. It was 5 p.m. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the grass. I walked to the small stone marker in the infant section. Leo Vance, beloved son. I sat down on the grass next to it. I didn't have flowers. I had the hard drive in my purse. "I got them, Leo," I whispered to the cold stone. "I got them all." For the first time in 8 months, I didn't cry. I felt a strange, cold emptiness where the rage used to be. It was the feeling of a job completed. Procedural justice had been served. But as I sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that vindication didn't bring him back. It didn't fill the nursery. It didn't warm the bed. It just cleared the board. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions and headlines. The story went viral, of course. The wedding day raid, the fake bump bride. TikTok detectives dissected every photo Jessica had ever posted, pointing out the inconsistencies in her pregnancy timeline that I had known about for months. I was painted as the avenging angel, or the scorned woman, depending on the outlet. I didn't give interviews. I didn't go on talk shows. I stayed in my apartment, working with the forensic team to untangle the web of Mark's finances. It was grueling work. Every transaction was a reminder of a lie. The dinner dates he charged to the company card while he was supposedly working late. The jewelry he bought Jessica with money stolen from my father's retirement fund. I traced it all. I built the case so tight that Mark's public defender advised him to plead guilty within 2 weeks. He got 15 years. Jessica, because she cooperated and claimed coercion, a final, desperate attempt to play the victim, got 5 years for fraud and conspiracy. My father sold Oakhaven. He sold his house. He moved into a condo near me. We had Sunday dinners, but they were quiet. The ghost of the betrayal sat at the table with us. We never talked about Jessica. She was erased from the family narrative, not out of malice, but out of necessity. She was a hazardous material that we had finally cleaned up. But the real resolution came 2 years later. I was 33. I had started my own firm, specializing in forensic accounting for divorce cases. I was known as the Bloodhound. I was expensive, I was ruthless, and I was very, very busy. I was sitting in my office on a rainy Tuesday when the receptionist buzzed. "Elena, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's an old friend. A Sarah Vance? Send her in," I said. Sarah walked in. She looked older, tired. She had just finished law school. She was carrying a box. "I was cleaning out Mom's attic," she said, putting the box on my desk. "I found this. I thought you should have it." I opened the box. Inside was a blanket, a soft, blue-knitted blanket. It was the one I had started making for Leo before the day I found them. I hadn't finished it. The needles were still stuck in the yarn. I touched the wool. It was soft. "I finished it," Sarah said softly. "I learned how to knit. I finished the border. I didn't want it to be unfinished business." I looked at the blanket, then I looked at Sarah. For the first time in 2 years, the ice in my chest cracked, not the sharp crack of heartbreak, but the slow, melting thaw of spring. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. It's perfect." "How are you?" Sarah asked. "Really? I'm working," I said. "I'm winning cases." "Are you happy?" she pressed. I looked out the window at the city skyline. Was I happy? Happiness seemed like a frivolous word, a word for people who hadn't seen the abyss. I was something else. I was solid. I was clear. I was unbroken. "I'm resilient," I said. "And that's enough." Sarah nodded. "Do you want to get dinner? There's a new Italian place." "Sure," I said. "Let me just file this brief." I turned back to my computer. I saved the document. I closed the laptop. I picked up the blue blanket and folded it carefully, placing it in my bag. I stood up. I walked out of the office, turning off the lights. The darkness didn't scare me anymore. I knew what was in it, and I knew I could survive it. The ledger was balanced. The audit was closed, and finally, I could walk away. Walking away was the easy part. Staying away, rebuilding a foundation on the scorched earth of a nuclear betrayal, was the work of a lifetime. The resolution phase of a crisis is often depicted in movies as a montage. The protagonist gets a haircut, smiles at a stranger, and the credits roll. But reality is not a montage. Reality is the Tuesday afternoon, 3 years later, when you are sitting in a conference room that smells of lemon polish and desperation, looking at a forensic audit of a stranger's life, and realizing that your trauma has become your trade. I was 34 years old now. My firm, Vance Forensic Analytics, occupied the entire 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. I charged $650 an hour with a 10-hour retainer minimum. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. My clients found me through whispers in country clubs, through scribbled notes passed by divorce attorneys, through the grapevine of the betrayed. They called me the Bloodhound, a nickname the press had given me during the trial of Mark and Jessica. And while I hated it initially, I had grown to wear it like armor. It fit. I could smell a hidden asset from 3 zip codes away. I could look at a business trip expense report and tell you the name of the mistress within 5 minutes. It was 2:15 p.m. on a rainy November Thursday. I was sitting across from a woman named Lydia Thorne. She was 45, impeccable in Chanel, but her hands were trembling as she held a styrofoam cup of lukewarm water. She was exactly where I had been in the library at Oakhaven, terrified, gaslit, and sensing that her reality was a construct. "He says I'm crazy, Elena," Lydia whispered. "He says the offshore accounts are for tax efficiency. He says the apartment in London is a corporate rental for his partners. But I found a receipt for a stroller. We don't have a baby. Our youngest is in college." I looked at the receipt she had slid across the mahogany table. It was for a Bugaboo Fox 5, purchased in Knightsbridge, London. £1,300. "Lydia," I said, my voice calm, the voice of the validator I had wished for back then. "You are not crazy. You are observant. And in my line of work, crazy is usually just a synonym for inconveniently accurate." I opened my laptop. "Let's look at the LLCs again, the ones he says are dormant." I spent the next 3 hours dismantling her husband's life. It was surgical. I found the shell company in the Cayman Islands within 40 minutes. I traced the consulting fees to a residential address in Kensington within an hour. By 5 p.m., I had a full dossier. Her husband wasn't just cheating. He had a second family, 2 children, a life built on the siphoned equity of Lydia's marriage. When I slid the final report toward her, I watched her face crumble. It was the same expression I had seen in the mirror the day I found Mark and Jessica. But this time, I could offer something more than sympathy. I could offer ammunition. "This is leverage, Lydia," I said, tapping the folder. "This is your freedom. You take this to your lawyer. You don't scream. You don't cry in front of him. You file for an emergency freeze on the assets, and you serve him papers while he's on his next business trip." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but her jaw was set. "How do you do this?" she asked. "How do you look at this filth every day and not scream?" I screamed once, I said, thinking of the library, of the gun, of the baby that wasn't there. I screamed so loud it broke my life. Now, I let the numbers scream for me. She left an hour later, walking taller than she had when she entered. I stood by the window, watching the rain streak the glass, feeling that familiar, cold satisfaction. It wasn't happiness. I wasn't sure I knew what that word meant anymore, but it was purpose. I was the immune system for other people's marriages. I was the antibody. My assistant, a sharp young man named David, who was terrified of me in a healthy way, buzzed the intercom. Miss Vance, there's a letter. It came from the correctional facility. It's marked personal. The air in the office went still. It had been 3 years. Mark was 3 years into a 15-year sentence. Jessica was in a minimum security facility in Connecticut, eligible for parole in 18 months. I hadn't heard from either of them since the sentencing. Bring it in, I said. David walked in, holding the envelope by the corner as if it were radioactive. He placed it on my desk and retreated instantly. I stared at it. The return address was stamped in red ink. Asterisk Federal Correctional Institution, Otisville asterisk. The handwriting was Mark's. Even after 3 years, the slant of his E made my stomach tighten. I didn't open it immediately. I sat there, listening to the hum of the server room next door. This was the Echo, the antagonist, trying to assert relevance from the grave of his own making. I knew what it would say. It would be a performance. He would claim he had found God, or that he was writing a memoir, or that he forgave Times for overreacting. Narcissists don't change in prison. They just get a captive audience. I picked up my letter opener, a heavy brass instrument that felt like a dagger. I slit the envelope. I pulled out a single sheet of lined yellow paper. Asterisk, Elena. Asterisk. Asterisk, I hear you're doing well. I saw your name in the journal. The Bloodhound. Catchy. It suits you. You always were better at math than you were at people. Asterisk. Asterisk. I'm writing because I'm up for a sentence review next month. Good behavior. I'm running the library here. Ironically, I'm good at organizing stories. Asterisk. Asterisk. My lawyer says a character statement from a victim can sway the board. If you wrote a letter just saying that you've moved on, that the restitution is being paid even though it's slow, that you don't feel I'm a threat, it could get me out 2 years early. Asterisk. Asterisk. Think about it. We had good years, Elle. Before the baby. Before Jessica. We were a team. You owe me that much for the house. You kept the equity. Asterisk. Asterisk. Jessica doesn't write me. She blames me. But I know you're logical. You know it was a business decision that got out of hand. Asterisk. Asterisk. Best. Asterisk. Asterisk. Mark. Asterisk. I read it twice. Then I laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound that startled me. A business decision. That's what he called the fake pregnancy. That's what he called the placental abruption that killed Leo. A business decision. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a favor. He was trying to transactionally negotiate his way out of consequences, just like he tried to negotiate with the gun in the library. I didn't feel angry. That was the surprise. I felt bored. He was so small, so predictable. He was a line item in a ledger that had been closed years ago. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah. She answered on the first ring. She was a junior partner at a law firm now, engaged to a pediatrician who was the kindest man I had ever met. He wrote to me. I said, Mark? Sarah's voice dropped an octave. Don't open it. Burn it. I read it. I said, he wants a character reference for his parole hearing. Sarah made a sound of disgust. The audacity. Do you want me to handle it? I can draft a cease and desist that will make his eyes bleed. No, I said, looking at the yellow paper. I don't want to engage. If I write a letter opposing him, he wins, because he knows he got to me. If I write a letter supporting him, he wins. The only way I win is if I become the void. So, silence? Sarah asked. Silence, I confirmed. I'm going to shred it, and then I'm going to order dinner. Dad's coming over tonight, right? Yeah, Sarah said, her voice softening. He's bringing the lasagna. And Elena? He's bringing a new lady friend. Her name is Margaret. She's nice. She's not Mom. Good, I said. Mom is still pretending Jessica is on a spiritual retreat in Europe. We can't fix Mom, Sarah said. But we survived. We did, I said. I hung up. I walked to the shredder in the corner of my office. I fed the letter into the machine. I watched Mark's handwriting turn into confetti. Asterisk. Zip. Zip. Gone. Asterisk. I didn't feel a thrill. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I felt the simple, quiet satisfaction of taking out the trash. I packed up my bag. I took the hard drive, the one that had started it all, out of the safe. I didn't need to keep it anymore. I had kept it as insurance, a totem of my trauma, but I didn't need insurance against a ghost. I walked out of the office building and into the cool Chicago night. I walked 2 blocks to the river. I stood on the bridge, looking down at the black water swirling below. I pulled the hard drive out of my bag. It was heavy, cold metal. I thought about Leo. I didn't think about his death this time. I thought about the dream I had the night before he died. I dreamt he was a little boy, running in a park, laughing. I'm okay, Leo, I whispered to the water. I'm really okay. I let the drive drop. It made a tiny splash, swallowed instantly by the current. I turned and walked toward the subway. I had a dinner to get to. I had a father who was trying to love again. I had a sister who had knitted a blanket to cover a wound. And I had a career that forced the truth into the light. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Lydia Thorne, my client from earlier. Asterisk. Thank you. I just served him. He's sleeping at a hotel. I'm with the kids. I feel lighter. Asterisk. I smiled. I typed back. Asterisk. Keep the receipts. See you Monday. Asterisk. I walked down the stairs to the train, the heels of my boots clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the concrete. The pacing of my life had changed. It wasn't the frantic acceleration of the crisis anymore. It wasn't the slow crawl of grief. It was a steady, rhythmic march forward. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the accuser. I was simply Elena. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough.